But now on Radio 4, feeding the problem. Many of us know the impulse to help a rough sleeper by buying a sandwich or hot food. Nick Buckley is the chief executive of the organisation Mancunian Way, and he's just been awarded an MBE in the New Year's Honours List for his service to the community in Manchester. Now he gives us his view on the damage caused by life on the streets and asks whether the kindness of the public is having unforeseen consequences.
We've just walked past two people sat on a bench, people with alcohol problems, so two alcoholics. One then stood up and rooting through the waste paper bin next to him looking for God knows what. And we can turn another corner now and we'll see somebody else sat on the floor, either begging or just sat there in a state you wouldn't believe in 21st century UK. I'm Nick Buckley and I've been involved in homelessness for about 15 years. Some of that time I worked for Manchester City Council, and part of my role in the city centre was rough sleeping, street drinking and begging. 10 years ago there were 17 rough sleepers in Manchester City Centre. How do I know that? Well, at that time I knew every single one of them by their first name. For 8 years it's been rising. There's been a slight dip, but now we've got over 90 people sleeping rough in the city centre. It's a disgrace, and how we've allowed this situation to happen still baffles me now. I think I've got an idea how to help. We all know now not to give money to people on the streets, but when I tell people my idea, I'm met with disgust and shocked faces. I'm asking all the kind-hearted people out there to stop handing out sandwiches and food to people on the streets.
I am Amanda Croom, the CEO of the Booth Centre. The Booth Centre's an advice and activities-based day centre in Manchester, and we're aiming to be very welcoming to people who are on the streets, to get them sorted out, to get them into accommodation, and then help them to move back into employment when they're ready.
So what do you think about people handing out sandwiches and food on the streets in Manchester City Centre?
Ironically, when I walk around town and I sit and chat to people who I know who are on the streets to talk about help we might be able to give, they often offer me food and they'll say, what sandwich would you like? I've got 6 sandwiches here. You know, do you want a cheese one or a ham one? Because they've been given far more than they can possibly eat. I think it's a really human response when you see someone else who's really in need, and there are a lot of people in our society who are in need, but I think people don't really realise that there are problems with giving out food on the street, and one of those things is that it's discouraging people from coming to services where they can get help. So, for example, if nobody gave food out on the streets of Manchester, then people who needed food more people would come to the Booth Centre. And while they were here, they would get good, nutritious food, but they would also be able to see the nurse about their health problems. They'd be able to see the housing advisor to get help to get into accommodation. And then we have showers, and we have a doctor, mental health worker, drugs and alcohol worker, arts activities, a wellbeing programme, an employment programme, and we'd be able to help them in so many different ways. And the food is a hook. But when so many people are given free food on the street, they don't have that initial incentive perhaps to come to see us, and that's a shame because they're really missing out on something that would benefit them.
I spoke to some people in the city centre about rough sleeping and what they do to help.
So Piccadilly Gardens is kind of rammed with homeless people, really like noticeably worse over the past sort of 5 or 6 years, which is it's pretty sad when you consider how affluent Manchester is, that we've got this massive homeless problem. It just doesn't kind of compute.
I think money can be a big problem because if they've got an addiction, they just go and pay for the addiction. So I think things like food, clothing are useful things.
Have you ever given sandwiches out or bought a sandwich or something for a homeless person?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. There was one time 2 years ago in Blackpool, I seen a young lad, he must have only been 16, on the step outside McDonald's. Went in, got him a hot drink. He was so thankful for that hot drink. I knew he wasn't one of the people that are just after the money. He was after literally something to eat, something to drink, and that's when you can tell when they're genuine one.
I stop and talk, actually. I know people's names, and so I can say hello to them, and I think that helps just to make people feel a bit more inclusive in society and not kind of ostracise them. I feel that's the kind of way I kind of try and help, to spend a bit of my time, really, with people.
People seem to know that handing out money doesn't help, but handing out a sandwich is kind. Amanda Kroom of the Booth Centre explains that kindness has consequences.
So if someone's sitting on the street and they're asking for money or receiving food from the very generous public, it has a really negative impact on them. What we find is that their self-esteem goes right down, that they become very depressed and very de-skilled and unmotivated. And it really destroys their health and their well-being and their sense of themselves in society, because they're just sitting and receiving things. And obviously, as well as the lovely food they get from generous members of the public, they also are ignored by a great many people, and a few people can be quite abusive to them. And if you experience that day after day, you start believing that you're not worth anything.
Do you think anybody is hungry in Manchester city centre?
I think there's no reason for people to be hungry. I think there's lots of places where people can get free food and they can sit and eat it in dignity and make a choice about what they have, and they can be inside and receiving that food in a really dignified, supportive way. I think the amount of food that is donated by the public is more than anyone can possibly eat.
This is Mancunian Way, where we help homeless people into work. Figures for September showed 151 rough sleepers in Greater Manchester. 91 of these were in the city centre. That is down after an 8-year rise. I thought it was important to speak to a rough sleeper and see if they know where to get a hot meal.
Yeah, Danzig Street, there's the Booth Centre. There's quite a few. There's about 5 different places where you can go. There's Oldham Street. That's a good one. It's every night. That.
Do you go to those places?
Yeah, I go quite a lot. Yeah. With me, like all these places where you get food, I'm there every night. We have at least 2 hot meals a day, plus sandwiches during the day. And that. I mean, you can never go hungry in Manchester. It's a good place, but then it's a bad place as well. But
because you're on the streets?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
You get people trying to rob you when you're asleep and that, but just got to get on with it, keep smiling. In and out of prison as well, so that's not helping. No. But in a way, it lets my body recover from the drugs that I'm on, so no. I'm only on the spice. I've got 2 years off the heroin and the coke and that. No. I've been 2 years off that now, so...
Do you ever see anybody who are just eating sandwiches that have been given them and then not accessing the support centres because of that?
I do, yeah, because what it is they just have to sit there and they know that the meal's going to come to them, so they don't have to move. It sounds a bit daft and whatever, but it's true though, you know what I mean? I've been there myself at times where I've just not been bothered moving and things have come to me, and it's just one of them worlds, isn't it? Like,
is there ever a point where you've been given too much food and you can't eat at all?
Yeah, but when that happens, I just walk around to find other people like who might need. It never goes to waste anyway.
When you go to the Booth Centre or Coffee for Craig or Danzig Street, what sort of help are you getting there? Are you working?
Right? You've got like a medical team there, you know, like in case you've got like infections and things like that. You can have a shower, and you've got access to clean clothes like boxer shorts, socks and pants and that. So you can't even go dirty really. There's no excuse for going dirty. I've been home for 6.5 years. And
I mean, I can tell by looking at you, you're extremely clean.
Yeah.
I never would have thought you were, rough sleeping, homeless.
Thank you, mate. Cheers, mate.
So as we were talking then, someone's just come up and given you a packet of crisps. Yeah. And obviously you put that in your bag probably for later.
Yeah.
Would you find it more valuable for that person then to have sat down and spoken to you and asked, was you okay and do you need any help, as opposed to just presuming
that... In his face, he had a smile on his face. Half of the time, people think I'm sat here just wanting money, but I like it when people just walk past with a smile on their face and say, hello, how are you, you know what I mean? It's not hard to be nice to somebody. It's nice to be nice, you know what I mean?
So you've got quite a bit in there. You've got several sandwiches, some crisps, some drinks, and you've been given all that today?
Yeah, well, in the past hour.
In the past hour?
Yeah, an hour and a half, just been sat here. So it's full of nice people. All I need now is just somebody to say, right, there's a flat there, don't mess it up and it's yours, and I wouldn't mess it up. I'm a qualified mechanic, believe it or not, I've got all my painting decorating certificates, industrial cleaning. I've got all my qualifications, just nowhere to live.
The gentleman we've just been talking to then, he's going to need help and support for the next few decades if he's ever going to get off the streets. And he almost admitted to us then, if he was given a flat tomorrow, he'd end up losing it because he hasn't got the skills or capability to live a fully independent life. What wasn't surprising was the gentleman could name nearly all the support centres that he could go to in the city centre to get help, support and a hot meal. And I've known this for several years. Everybody knows where to go. They're heavily advertised. They've been to most of them. I mean, that black bag next to him must have had 6-7 sandwiches into it, a couple of packets of crisps, some cans of drinks, some fruit in there. The bag was completely full. Now, he may go to one of the support centres later to get hot food and get some help and support, but if he's having a bad day, he's got the choice of not going because he's got a bag full of food now. So he sounds like he will go later today, which is great, but we've given him an option not to go. And sometimes I feel like a stuck record, and I've said it many times, it's only getting vulnerable people into the support centres that we can ever start the long journey of changing their lives and getting them into a better place. They have to go through that door of the support centre first of all. Over the last 5 years, the number of rough sleepers in England has almost doubled to 4,500. Councils measure that by counting the number of rough sleepers on a given night. In Northern Ireland, it was only 38.
Scotland counted 2,876 people who slept on the streets once in the 3 months before the homelessness application. It's estimated that the nightly snapshot number in Scotland is just over 700.
In Wales, the councils estimate that 347 people slept rough in October last year. These are big numbers, but what if Manchester is just an odd case? Is this level of help available in other parts of the country? Petra Salva is the rough sleeping director of the charity St Mungo's, which works across London and the South East.
I have endless conversation with service users who have told me that they would have sought help sooner had it not been so easy to sustain a life on the street. And for me, that's the key thing. If I've got people I've worked with over 25 years saying that it was very easy to remain on the streets, stay on the streets because of the kindness of the great British public, that has got to be recognised, but it's also got to be understood that what the dangers are of remaining in that situation for prolonged periods of time, and that's the message we need to get across.
I've heard the same things over many years, and some of those service users later on, years later, feel quite angry towards those people because they blame those people now for keeping them trapped on the streets where they would have made a positive choice sooner. I believe St Mungo started as a soup run. Why did that change?
It has changed because the times have changed. We've learnt that actually doing things like providing skilled outreach workers, having supported accommodation, having emergency shelters, having services that can help people recover from homelessness like substance misuse and helping people with their mental health actually gets results and actually gets people away from living on the streets. So, 50 years ago, different context, different time, not the same level of services. We've moved on, the times have moved on, our knowledge about the interventions that work have moved on, so that's why we don't do that anymore.
Charities like Shelter in Crisis say handing out food to rough sleepers is really up to the individual, but Petra told me about an alternative to sustaining people on the streets. It's an approach she designed, which was for a time used in Manchester as well.
No Second Night Out is a principle and it's a project in London. The principle is if that people land on the streets for the first time, we need to work really rapidly, really fast and really urgently to get people away from the streets. And the reason for that is really quite simple. When you stay on the streets for prolonged periods of time, it becomes more dangerous. And the longer you stay on the streets, the harder it is to get people off. And the longer you stay on the streets, the more complicated, the more harm it causes that individual and the local communities. So No Second Night Out, at its very core, attempts to try and get to people really quickly. So I think we've got an 80% success rate of getting to people and helping them off the streets when they've slept rough for the first time. I think the real challenge is to make sure people stay away from the streets, stay away from that lifestyle and can rebuild their lives. And this is where, I guess, the heart of your original question comes in around, providing food and on the street, is that actually we need to move away from that and think about building communities and people building their lives away from that lifestyle.
No, I totally agree. I mean, what I see is hardly any work around prevention and intervening extremely early to stop people ending up on the streets. I would go one step further. I'd like to see it to become a council statutory duty of no second night out, where we then can hold councils to account.
I think that's a really, really important point. To illustrate this, the reality is in London, 22 people bed down on the streets for the first time in their lives every single night in London. I think that's a shocking statistic.
Wow.
So, we've got a real challenge, haven't we, in terms of stopping people getting there. I think it's a challenging subject. But what we need to do is we just need to constantly communicate and show what does work.
I knew they wouldn't agree with me, but on a very wet night, I went to speak to a group of people who don't just hand out sandwiches, they run a weekly outdoor hot food kitchen.
I'm John Shaw and I work for Street Treats as a volunteer at the Street Kitchen in Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester. On a Thursday night we set up and we provide hot drinks, treats as in the form of cakes, curry, KFC, sandwiches, food and clothing, including sleeping bags and waterproof clothes. We appreciate your point of view, but this provides a community for people. We don't allow dealing, we don't allow drugs. They come here and they have a chat with people and there's guys here laughing and smiling and enjoying themselves.
Yeah, mass genocide is happening. Mass genocide is happening in the streets of Manchester. Arcade, please. And it's only these are same. Food is lovely.
There you go. Thank you.
Food is lovely.
Thank you. Go and get yourself some food. Have another bit of gas.
Yeah, so she's obviously got lots of problems, that young lady there. Has got butane with her, and obviously using that to cope with whatever issues she's got.
One of our regulars, don't know her, she's obviously passing through because she's heading away. She's not come for the food. She's walked past, like I say, never seen her before, don't know her. But yeah, we do get people with addictions and alcohol and drug problems, and we don't allow people to deal, we don't allow them to take drugs here. Most of the people here are just needy. We've had 2 meetings with the council in the last 6 weeks where they hate us, they want us to be gone, but only because we're right in the centre. They've offered us another pitch outside the train station underneath the arches where you can't be seen, so they threatened us with parking fines. What we said was we're happy to move as long as we can get interaction with the council, because I've asked for drug and alcohol support on site, the Rough Sleepers team to turn up, so all these different outreaches, so mental health, all these to be here. We've all, through me, agreed that we would move if we get the wraparound service, because at the moment we're a bit of a sticking plaster. So I sort of get what you're saying. We provide a service for people who nobody else is going to touch. I'm not going to point the finger. We have failed asylum seekers, so who's going to support them? There's no wraparound service to them, so we have to provide a little bit more than the council or anybody else can do.
If you look on streetsupport.net, for today's example, from 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock tonight, there's free food somewhere in or just outside the city centre. So are people not accessing that support in those venues because they can wait until it's more convenient when it's in Piccadilly Gardens?
Nope. I think if you're like me, you'll have at least 3 meals a day. At the moment, the only provision that's open at this time is Coffee for Craig, who we support because they can't handle the figures. Whereas we can feed 100 to 200 people this evening.
If we're attracting vulnerable people into Piccadilly Gardens to access your food and your support, we're then dragging them into a place that at some level isn't even safe for the public on some days.
I mean, I understand your point of view when you say they're vulnerable, but my opinion is that they need support. Okay, they get support from me, they get guidance. I had a couple come to see me 2 weeks ago. They came in a month ago. They were new on the streets and had nowhere to go, and we advised them to go to Coffee with Craig. They came back a couple of weeks ago and said, thanks very much, you've got us somewhere, and we give them the advice. There may be some vulnerable people. They're going to be vulnerable if we're here or there or indoors. You okay?
Yeah, so the gentleman was extremely poorly, throwing up, looked like he had something stuck in his throat. He was on crutches. We thought he was going to fall over. They managed to get him some water to try to clear his throat, but he's got a really badly damaged leg. He was in quite a state. I know John is doing things with the best intentions and is an extremely kind and decent person, but I felt that setup wasn't safe for vulnerable people. To me, it didn't feel like a secure place. We spoke to Visha Lancaster from Coffee for Craig. She didn't agree that they were overwhelmed, and she was also worried about vulnerable people being drawn to Piccadilly Gardens.
I'm Councillor Sue Murphy, Deputy Leader, Manchester City Council.
Do you think that handing food out on the streets actually contributes to getting people off the streets?
I don't think it does help people get off the streets. People do it as an act of kindness, and that's really good, but there are much better ways of actually helping people get the kind of support they need to make the change.
Almost every professional organisation in Manchester agrees with you and with me. What's Manchester City Council doing to educate the public about not saying don't help, but these are the other ways you can help that will make a difference to people's lives?
We've got quite a lot of information that we put out on a regular basis, directing people towards the organisations that will help people. We have a brilliant voluntary sector in Manchester. We'd like people to help and support them. They can donate to Big Change, which helps get people off the street. They can volunteer, or they can give things directly to the organisations who can make sure that they're getting what they need and it goes directly to the people who need them.
Over many years, I've seen many councils try to be proactive on this subject about trying to educate the public and trying to coordinate their approaches, and it always ends up failing because of the backlash from the public, who then get onto Twitter and Facebook, and then it seems to me, through social media, they seem to make politicians backtrack.
It's complicated, and I think the voices of people who've been homeless themselves are the most powerful voices in all of this. So that's our plan, is to start putting some of those stories about what has actually made a difference for people that we've all helped between us. And Nick, you'll remember, it must be 15 years ago, we had a go at trying to stop people feeding on the street, and you're right, we had a massive backlash. We have to have conversations with the groups that are doing it and help them to move into the space where they can help people in a better way.
At that time, because there was more council staff, it was very proactive, so it was about going out and challenging people and trying to educate them. And the council's had huge cuts over the last 10 years, so, and we need to acknowledge that. Can't Manchester Council be more proactive? There may be a political hit on social media, but when we're talking about our fellow citizens dying on the street, surely that political hit should be, do you know what? At this moment in time, I don't care about social media. I'm going to do what's right for the right reasons.
We've been having discussions directly with the groups who are going out and feeding people on the street about how can we support you to do this in a different way and a better way. It's not been easy, but I think by getting everybody in the same room and having those conversations, it really helps. And organisations like Coffee for Craig and Barnabas, who actually started out doing the same thing and have made that change into having an indoor facility and bringing people inside, have been there alongside us, saying, actually, we did the same as you're doing, and then we realised it's not the best way, so this is what we're doing now, and encouraging them to make that change.
The government generally advises people to direct rough sleepers to local services. A spokesman from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government said rough sleeping was unacceptable in modern Britain, and that while the number of rough sleepers has fallen for the first time in 8 years, there was more to do. They said they'll be giving councils in Manchester over £700,000 to tackle rough sleeping.
I think there's the assumption by a lot of members of the public that if they see someone begging that they are rough sleeping. Lots of those people won't be rough sleeping, and also a huge number of homeless people would never beg.
Here's Amanda Croom again.
Rough sleeping is really just the tip of the iceberg of homelessness. There's a relatively small number, a far too big a number, but a relatively small number of people rough sleeping, but huge numbers of people are homeless, living in temporary accommodation or bed and breakfasts or sofa surfing on friends' floors. And many of those people will never beg on the streets. Some people who are begging on the streets actually have their own tenancies. They may be struggling in those tenancies and they may need support for a range of support issues, but they're not actually homeless at all.
Some people might say to us that as the Booth Centre, you're only saying this because you want to dominate this theme in Manchester and you want any grants and you want the money to make the Booth Centre bigger and better. What would you say to that?
This isn't about saying to the public that instead of buying people food, you should give donations to us. Of course, we're always happy to receive donations, but I would prefer people to keep their money in their pockets rather than giving the food away. It's very much about saying, think about the consequence of what you're doing, and it may make you feel a bit better and you may feel that you're relieving a small amount of suffering, but long term you're actually doing that person, contributing to that person being in significant harm in their lifestyle.
So if you're a person walking out of a shop and you think about buying a sandwich for someone sat outside, instead of that, what should we be asking people to do?
Talk to people. And get down on their level, perhaps direct them to local support services if you know where those places are. Perhaps collect some leaflets for local support services and give those to the person so that they know where they can get help. That way you're treating the person as an individual and you're treating them with respect.
So you're giving them some empowerment themselves to do something about it.
It's about giving your time as opposed to food.
Sometimes we look at rough sleeping and we think there's nothing can be done, it's too big a problem. And I'm sure you've got lots of examples of really big successes.
Absolutely. There was a woman called Jane who had been on the streets for a little while and had started begging, and it became a real lifestyle for her. But we were able to intervene in that and we persuaded her to come up to the centre, and she then asked if she could help, and she's now volunteering and she's actually serving that food to other people. Her whole face has changed. It just lights up every morning when she comes in and she says, this is my job, I'm volunteering, I'm helping other people. And she tries to persuade other people on the streets to come into the centre and receive the support that they can, and she's now got a tenancy and she's doing really well, and the change in her health and well-being is just absolutely fantastic to see, and that's the kind of change we want to provide for so many more people.
Beginning of the year, I met a gentleman who was a former rough sleeper in temporary accommodation. We managed to get him a part-time job cleaning with one of the companies that support us, and then from there we got him onto a construction training course, and 6 weeks ago we started as a labourer on a construction site on 27 grand a year. For us that's a huge success.
So now that gentleman can buy his own food and can go to a supermarket and choose what food he wants to buy and choose what food he wants to eat and eat it in his own tenancy, and that's fantastic. That's what we want to achieve for everybody. Everybody should have the right to do that.
Feeding the Problem was presented by Nick Buckley, who's just been awarded an MBE. It was produced by Kevin Core. And now on Radio 4, from our own correspondent, presented by Kate Adey.
Good morning, and looking back on a year